let's start things off with our practice news and notes for today. Micah
Mhm.
Hyde, Jamison Crowder returned to practice, but only for individual drills, so they didn't take part in team stuff. Deion Dawkins returned to practice in full. He left the team for personal reasons, came back. Thank Bills fans today. Obviously, we're not going to get too much into whatever happened, whatever he's dealing with. We're gonna leave him to process that. And Tommy Doyle left practice late with an injury. So those are the biggest news and notes sort of from training camp today. Outside of that, the defensive line is just absolutely dominating, whether it's the first unit, the second unit, the third unit, it doesn't matter. They had to pull the starters today on the defensive line in order for the offense to sort of get in valid reps. Kyer Elam called them monsters. Joe Biscaglia wrote today that Ed Oliver had 2 sacks and 4 to 5 pressures in like limited work, like 25 or so snaps. Von Miller and Ed Oliver quickly becoming fast friends. Deion Dawkins said it's unfair when those two guys are on the same side of the defensive line. Miller was getting some A-gap blitzing reps in over the center, which was a 2017 Sean McDermott staple. Gregory Rousseau mentioned earlier this offseason, he's going to kick inside a little more. So we could be seeing some new looks from this Buffalo Bills defensive line in 2022. Rousseau's name has popped. Basham's name has popped on a couple of beat reporters' lists and articles over the past few days. Brandon Bryant even got some love from Joe Biscaglia today. What is
Mike Love got some love as well.
Mike Love? Yeah, Mike Love got some love as well. What is your excitement level for the defensive line? Is makeover number 3 finally the one that works?
I mean, that's the phrase, right? Third time's the charm. And in each successive year over the last couple of years, I know I have certainly been vocal about my hopes and expectations for the defensive line. Last year was no different. And you can say what you want about the defensive line last year, but maybe didn't quite live up to maybe some of the lofty expectations that I set, although they were still very good. So now you add Von Miller to the mix. You add Gregory Rousseau coming in year 2, Basham coming in year 2, Ed Oliver as a budding superstar. You bring back Jordan Phillips. You bring back Shaq Lawson. I've said this before on this show. I really love the mix of guys they have on this defensive line this year. I think if I try to think about this and sort of how I've set my expectations for the defensive line over the past couple seasons, my expectations this year are going to be higher than they have been over the past 2 seasons. And that is not a knock necessarily on the past 2 seasons, because my expectations were quite high last year as well. If you remember, we had plenty of debates on who's that defensive lineman that's not going to make the roster and this and that, because it was such a deep group. This year, this mix of guys has the chance to be really special. And I even said, on a prior show, I think it's going to be a top 10 run defense this year as one of my sort of predictions for the year. I think that, Von Miller is going to be that missing piece we need maybe to close out some of those 1-score games and to close out in the playoffs. And I think that between that and Ed Oliver coming into his own and Rousseau, this to me just screams elite defensive line. And when you're having to pull your starters in a camp practice because the offense can't do anything, it is a testament to the defensive line. We're going to talk about the injuries as well on the offensive line, but it is hard not to get excited about this defensive line, which, by the way, is improved, at least on paper, and this defense was the number 1 unit last year overall. So it's hard not to be excited right now about this defensive line.
And Steve Nesbitt comes in and says, can we get more pressure against premier offensive lines in the AFC? Only time will tell. You get a good test week 1. I know the Rams, they've lost Andrew Whitworth, but they just signed, I'm blanking on his name, but he's your guy from free agency. They re-signed him to that big deal. Yeah, Joseph Nopum to that big deal at left tackle. So they still got some dudes along that offensive line there in LA. That's going to be a good test for them. They play the Ravens early, etc. But Kyer Elam allows them to do some more man-to-man stuff. You saw Tremaine Edmonds making plays today. You got Jordan Porter and Micah Hyde back there in the secondary. Trey looks like he could be back early. Obviously, we've had this conversation, as you mentioned, about the defensive line before. Our expectations have been high before and we've been disappointed. But if it is finally the rotation that clicks, this is finally the group that clicks. There's so much talent behind them in the back seven that this could be not only a defense that does well in terms of like yardage, statistically being the number one, et cetera, like they have been in years past. This is a defense that can lead the league or push to lead the league in turnovers, because we've already seen Josh Allen turn the ball over a ton. So that will be something to keep an eye out for as the season starts. But Ron Beck makes a great point here. Chris Jenke makes a great point in the comment section. Our D-line is a monster, but we need our offensive line to get healthy. How much of this is the fact that our starting offensive line from left to right, Deion Dawkins, Roger Saffold, Mitch Morse, Ryan Bates, and Spencer Brown, haven't even been able to take a snap together, and they probably won't for some time. Injuries have been an issue for the offensive line early in camp. Obviously, Deion Dawkins came back today. You had Bobby Hart and Greg Van Roten rotating at left guard. Van Roten came in for Hart after he got roasted by Ed Oliver a ton. You had Tommy Doyle at right guard today until he got hurt late in practice. You had Quessenberry at right tackle. I'm just now starting to realize that this means that maybe Cody Ford blew his shot if Bobby Hart is getting reps with the ones ahead of him, because Cody Ford is the one who started camp at left guard. Saffold likely out until probably late preseason. Ike Butker likely out till midseason. Ryan Bates, the soft tissue thing, he's missed the last 4 practices. Spencer Brown working back from that back injury, that's really super concerning. Hasn't taken a team rep since day one, and those team reps were on the second team. What's your level of concern right now with the offensive line?
It's getting up there, I will say. I mean, to answer your first question, I mean, like when you put a dominant, at least on paper, dominant defensive front against basically a second team unit, like it's not surprising to me that we're seeing that extreme, dichotomy there with how dominant the defense has been versus how unimpressive that offensive line has been. But I will say this, it is a little bit concerning because we're only a week in to training camp. We haven't even had the first preseason game. It's August 1st, right? We still got it over a month until the season starts. So you can look at this one of two ways. You could look at it as, hey, there's plenty of time still, right, to get these guys back and healthy and get them practicing as a unit. Or you could look at it as, hey, we already have this many injuries early in camp and we're only a week in. It's not a great sign. The offensive line, the starting unit, we expect it to be pretty good. I don't think anyone's sitting here saying like that starting unit was going to be like a top 3 unit in the NFL. At least I wasn't thinking that. But an above average unit, yes, they should be an above average unit. But when you start seeing these injuries pile up and you start testing the depth of who you have, you realize this depth is depth for a reason. Like these guys as a unit together, as a second team unit, obviously outside of Mitch Morse, who's been there the whole time, but everything else around him fluctuating, it's not been pretty. So look, I'm not pounding like the panic alarm, quite yet, but to use Aaron's phrase, like I'm going to pump the brakes on pounding the panic alarm, but I am, my level of concern is growing, right? I think you want to see at least some positive news in regards to some of these injuries, especially with Ryan Bates, right? With the soft tissue thing. You never know how long those types of things are going to linger. Spencer Brown, as a taller guy, we know those types of back issues tend to linger as well. So like, it's a little bit of kind of what we saw heading into last year, right? Trying to get everybody ready for week 1, and we're kind of scrambling right now. So it's a little concerning.
I think it's almost time to start the waiver wire watch as we get into late August, as guys start to get cut. The Buffalo Bills might be on waiver wire watch for some veteran guys who get released. I think it might be time to start talking about possibly, and we're going to get to this later in the show, carrying 10 guys along the offensive line to start the season because of some of these injuries and things that have piled up. You might want some depth there, at least to start the year, whether you have to use it throughout the entirety of the year. Probably not, but you might want those 10 guys to start. The Bills have done it before back in the Connor McDermott days, and you saw them keep 11 defensive linemen last year. They're not going to do that again. And then at the end of the day, too, Darrell Williams is still sitting out there. So it might be time to give Darrell Williams a call as well. So a couple of different things start to, trickle into your mind when you're hoping Saffold, Bates, and Brown are back week 1, when in reality, it's likely going to be a Rusty Saffold, Ryan Bates, and probably David Quessenberry at right tackle, with Brown probably having to start the year as like the swing tackle. So it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out. And we're going to dig back into the offensive line when we talk about position battles in a little bit here as well.